Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Friday the 13th, that's pretty cool. I don't know about you, but it's rainy and misty here and I'm ready for the weekend. So this is a Knowledge Bites webinar, our Funders Roundtable. This is part of the Southern Vermont Economy Project, which is funded by USDA Rural Development, which puts on webinars, workshops, trainings to help entities in Southern Vermont on the projects that they're working on. So this is a primer actually to our grant writing workshop that we are hosting next week. I will put a link into the chat function if you haven't signed up for that yet and you would like to. There's still room, so please do that. It is a 3-day workshop. And you can choose to come to 1, 2, or all 3 days. So it's kind of choose your own adventure. So I'm going to hand it over to Jen Stromson. She is one of our main grant writers at BDCC, actually. So I thought she would be the most appropriate person to sort of facilitate the conversation of the funders that are present. Just a word on structure, I guess. We have some questions that we gave the panelists ahead of time, so they could prepare some answers. But Jen will ask them to go around and do a 1-minute spiel about who they are and what they fund. Then we'll go through and have a little bit longer chunk of time to answer those questions that we had posed to them. And then we'll have a facilitated conversation and open up for questions. So if you do have questions throughout this, go ahead and type it into the chat or hold on to them until we get to the question part. And you can either put it into the chat or raise your hand and ask it out loud. That would probably be the best way to do it, is just sort of save it for the end. Otherwise, it might get lost in the chat function. So Jen, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Hi, good morning. I am all those things that Sarah said. And I also was a fundraiser before I got into planning and then economic development, very more like traditional kind of fundraising, donors and things like that. I also think this is it's Friday the 13th. I feel like, everything is weird nowadays anyway. I'm just going to start this with sort of what's in the back of my mind, which is the phrase, those who can't do, teach. I do write a lot of grants and sometimes we do well, but we've just come off of a terrific run of 4 major failures. And so, I not only, understand a lot of different kinds of funding vehicles and things like that, but I also understand the pain of this and, how much time goes into this. And especially for smaller organizations, that we put a lot of capacity into things that are effectively a form of gambling. And we don't have a choice. And that's kind of how we run ourselves. And so that's, why we focus on this angle so much. We want organizations to have a lot of different approaches to finding sustainability and to doing projects. But the reality is that a lot of the money that's out there for us has to be accessed in these ways. And so we focus on this. So I'm going to be be very intentional about how I go through the funders to make sure everyone gets time to speak. So I'm going to actually use my checklist because there are 11 people and I can't see you all on my screen. So I'm going to call you. So as Sarah said, in this first round, I'm going to call your name and just ask you to give like a 1-minute, like who you are, so people can tie a face in an organization to a name, and up to a minute. So I'm going to start with Ben Doyle because you're first on the list.
Oh no! Thank you so much. Thanks for putting this together, and it's great to see so many old friends on the screen and some new ones too. So my name's Ben Doyle. I'm the newish president of the Preservation Trust of Vermont. This is, believe it or not, my first funders panel in that role. So I'm not going to know the nuances of everything that we do because it turns out we do a lot, but I'm happy to connect with everybody and give you a sense of who we are, what we're about, and then also always anxious to connect with people offline if I can be helpful in any way. So the Preservation Trust is a 501c3 nonprofit that's been around for 40 years. And our mission is to preserve the essential character of Vermont by maintaining the built environment. what that really means is that we work to build community by helping them save the places and spaces they love. And we do that in a lot of different ways. It's a pretty creative and complex organization that works in a lot of different roles, whether that's helping prevent sprawl or helping a town save a critical building that's a part of its past and future. And so that's really what we're about. Our funding works in different ways, but typically we do three main things. One is we provide technical assistance to communities and groups that are looking to save something special about their town, whether that's a town hall, a general store, reactivating a church, all kinds of different things. It's really about the community, what the community wants and what's important to them. We provide that technical assistance on what are the different approaches to do that. Then we can also provide pretty small seed grants for assessment. So if you're a small town in southern Vermont and you have a town hall that's been underutilized and you have some capital needs, we're often a really good first step for doing a building assessment. Not that kind of detailed engineering work that you're going to need for major implementation, but to give you a ballpark figure of, hey, this is what we're up against. We need to look at the foundation, we need to look at the roof, things like that. So we can provide that kind of initial assessment funding that can help you develop a strategy to move your project forward. And then finally, we do have some implementation dollars. We manage a couple of grant programs in partnership with some folks on this call, including Northern Borders Regional Commission. And we've also received funding from the federal government from the Paul Brune Historic Preservation Program, named after our founder. And so there's some significant implementation dollars involved there to help with capital projects on historic buildings or buildings that are really central to a community spirit. So, you know, we funded things like the Yellow Barn in Hardwick, a number of general stores, the Putnam Block down in southern Vermont. You know, not huge investments, but we try to make really timely ones that can help move a project forward and help you leverage additional funding. So maybe I'll leave it there and look forward to hearing from the other folks and answering any questions that I can.
All right, great. Now, Ben actually answered the first two questions, which is great. So let's do it that way. Introduce yourself. What's your organization? Give a little synopsis of the kind of funding that you do and a couple of examples. It could be specific projects or types of projects as Ben did. Abbey, Salomon, you're up next.
Hi, I'm the loan officer at Community Capital of Vermont. We're a mission-driven microlender that works with all businesses in Vermont within our mission. So we do lend. We have some grants. We have a TA side, but our main focus is on lending to entrepreneurs who are finding it difficult to get funds other ways. So that could be because of credit issues. It could simply be because they're a startup and a lot of banks aren't funding startups. We work with all industries. We're not focused on anything specific. But as a microlender, our loans are between 1,000 and 100,000. Our averages are around 30 to 40, which has been a lot less this summer with COVID. So recently, most of our loans have been true microloans, so between $10,000 and $15,000, which are great because we can get those out the door a lot quicker. So again, we work with everybody. The last 5 loans that we've had have been extremely broad, from two sisters that are selling some health food items online, to a metal worker that needed a piece of equipment. Most recently worked with a woman who does Reiki up in the Northeast Kingdom that's doing a mobile. So she needed help with or funding for the tractor or the trailer, and then some additional working capital. So again, on top of that, we have an in-house TA available to all our borrowers. He's free. His services, he does a lot with QuickBooks, but he's available for any advice or assistance for our borrowers. And we do have some grant funds available through him for our borrowers. But again, that's after you become part of our portfolio. So that's what we do.
Thank you, Susan. I think that's great. And I think, you know, one of the things I love about these funder roundtables is we kind of get to highlight some of the important pieces of the ecosystem and sort of ways different lenders function, like, you know, what you might get from working with Abbey versus working with a commercial lender in terms of wraparound support and technical assistance. So thank you. Next up is Susan Monahan from Thompson Trust, please.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me letting me participate in this forum. It's always interesting to meet other funders and hear what they do. So the Thomas Thompson Trust has been in the Brattleboro area for about 120 years. And we fund programs around healthcare, human services, and education. We also fund the cultural arts and general kind of civic betterment programs, although those two are less of a priority for us. We make maybe 35 grants a year in the Brattleboro area. We do extend our giving throughout Windham County, but we tend to stick around the Brattleboro area. So it would be rare that we would make grants up in the Springfield area. The Thompson Trust also focuses on a community in New York, the community of Rhinebeck in Dutchess County. We have 30% of our giving goes to Dutchess County, New York, and 33% and 66% goes to the Brattleboro area. We're kind of all over the place. Our grant sizes range from, you know, $1,200 to $500,000. We do a number of multi-year grants for some of our bigger projects, most notably the United Way's Windham Dental Center. We often have a multi-year commitment going to Brattleboro Memorial Hospital. And then we, you know, very often fund programs like the Wyndham Heat Fund or the work of the Brattleboro Area Affordable Housing Corp. Just kind of throwing out a couple of examples. We like to make our process really user-friendly. We always encourage people to contact me in advance of applying for a grant. I always like to, if I have the opportunity to talk something through with an applicant, I think that's often very helpful. So yeah, I'm looking forward to answering any questions people might have.
Great, thank you so much. Next up is Rich Grogan from Northern Borders.
Hey, I know I'm having a good day when I remember to unmute myself because lately that has not been my MO. But anyway, hello everyone, happy Friday. I echo Sarah's malaise about the gray weather after we've had such a beautiful fall, but I guess we can't complain too much because we're still in a beautiful part of the world no matter the weather. So hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to say hello. I'm Rich Grogan. I'm the Executive Director at the Northern Border Regional Commission, and we serve 4 states, all of Vermont, most of New Hampshire, most of Maine, and most of upstate New York and Western New York above the 90. And we make economic development and community development grants primarily through our Economic and Infrastructure Development Grant Program, which just basic timelines for those of you who aren't familiar with us. It comes out in about, you know, our materials come out in say March, and then applications are due in May-ish. It was a little delayed this year because of COVID. You know, we're only about 10 years old, which is still pretty youthful with regard to government agencies, but we've seen a lot of growth in our appropriation in the last 3 or 4 years in particular, and we've been able to put some significant amounts of money into a variety of projects. We actually have 7 funding areas, and don't worry, I'm not gonna put up a PowerPoint or something like that and try to take you through all of them, but we see, you know, we have really 2 kind of main buckets, I would say. One is what we would call sort of hard built infrastructure, and those grants are available up to $1 million maximum, and that was new for this year. Previously, we had a $500,000 maximum. And then we have very cleverly non-infrastructure grants, which often take the form, quite frankly, of a lot of workforce development, technical assistance type projects, you know, job training, skills training, et cetera. And those grants have a maximum of $350,000. Any municipality, instrumentality of government, or nonprofit entity is welcome to apply. And Jen mentioned that writing grants is a little bit like gambling. And we try to take a little bit of the odds away from that a little bit and try to make it a little bit easier. We really encourage people to be reaching out to us on an ongoing basis to talk about projects that they're developing. You know, in this last grant round, it was such a strange time. I mean, you know, our applications were due on June 1st, you know, and the world was still like totally in the headlights trying to figure out what was going on with COVID. But we actually had a significant increase this year in our number of applications. And that's because of a lot of our projects that come to us are from organizations that have been developing these ideas over a long horizon or a long period of time. And so, you know, if I leave you with anything today, if you're not familiar with us, I encourage you to reach out to us to talk about a project that you're thinking about, because we'd love to hear about it. And Christy Farnham, who's not on the call today, is with Agency of Commerce and Community Development, is our MBRC State Program Manager. And I think an important thing to know about MBRC as well is that we are a federal-state partnership, and we take that very seriously. So any projects that might be gestating in Vermont, we would want to connect them with Christy as well to make sure that you know, projects are in line with the state's economic development plans, as well as, you know, kind of our funding priorities at MBRC. So I don't want to hog.
Hey there, Rich. I actually am on the line here. You know me, I can't connect with my video because I'll lose you all, but I'm here as the Brownfield RLF because that's the program I'll be highlighting today. Hi, all.
You've also solved a mystery for me because I did not know who Brownfield RLF was, but now that's good to know. So thank you so much, Christy. I don't want to hog the microphone, so I'll stop there, but thanks again, and I look forward to the rest of our conversation today.
Great, thank you very much. The next person up is going to be Kate McCarthy from Vermont Natural Resource Council.
Hello, thank you, Jen. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here in this conversation. You know, I'm struck as people are talking about the real complementarity of these different funding sources in terms of bringing together our community places that we love, the infrastructure that we need, our economic development needs as a state. So I'm really pleased that people are interested in those things. I work at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. I'm the Sustainable Communities Program Director. We're a statewide environmental organization. We've been around since 1963. And as you can probably tell from my title and are just being around for a long time, we've always really cared about that intersection of human and natural communities, because you can't do environmental work without finding a place for people to live and thrive and innovate. And you can't, you don't want to build places for people in ways that undermine the environment that we value and benefit from. So I run our Sustainable Communities program, which is very much about smart growth, promoting downtowns and villages, housing and transportation choice, fighting sprawl, and keeping working lands available. So our grants are related to that work, to smart growth work. In fact, they're called the small grants for smart growth because they are small and they are focused on the types of efforts that I just mentioned. Our grant program has been around since about 2018. We give grants from about $500 to $1,500. And with that amount, what we're really looking to do is help smaller scale projects, communities, nonprofits, planning commissions, whomever, catalyze projects that they are interested in doing. And when I say smart growth projects, I'm talking about that type of development that prioritizes our compact, historic downtown and village centers, as well as non-historic, compact, smart growth areas. And when we do that, we can really get more housing that people need and can afford, and we can get around driving or in other ways. And we can elevate and hold on to historic preservation as an essential part of who we are. So recipients have been towns, nonprofits, planning commissions, they can be energy committees. We think pretty broadly, but it has to be a nonprofit or someone seeking nonprofit status or having as a fiscal agent a nonprofit. And like Susan mentioned, if there's ever any question about the eligibility or the fit of a given project, I do enjoy talking with people and thinking it through. So smart growth can be a lot of things, and since it covers so many topics, I'll give you our last 5 projects that we funded to give you an idea of how this might apply to you. So I'll go from most recent to 5 back. And I'm excited to do that because the most recent project that we funded was in the town of Rockingham. Congratulations. Hello, Gary. And that was to contribute toward the Southern Vermont Economies Project with the Incremental Development Alliance in that town, really looking at how we can make the most of the buildings we have and how we can redevelop at the right scale the housing and business opportunities we need in our villages. So I'm very excited about that one. We have also recently funded the Upper Valley Apple Core, and that is a project in White River Junction where there's a nonprofit building something called a fruit walk. And that's a walking trail through the village with fruit and nut-bearing trees that people can access. So it's a way to get into the village, it's food access. And what we're funding specifically are engineering and permitting costs for a rain garden that's part of that project. So those are 2 very different types of projects, but they both really help reinforce our places. We've also funded recently the town of Wheelock up in the Northeast Kingdom, some community conversations around the reuse of a historic town hall and in the village. We've funded something called Canaan Naturally Connected in the town of Canaan, and that's public input around the future usage of the community forest with, knowing that open spaces are a very important complement to the compact smart growth areas where we live and work. And then we've also funded the South Hero Land Trust, which has been coordinating and doing outreach for a South Heroes Trails Committee to really catalyze conversations amongst landowners, trail groups, people who can do the easements on those trails in order to make sure there's a connected trail network. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about that project is that they're really working hard to include people in trail usage who may not usually be the ones who get out and about. There's a lot of tourism use of trails in that area, but they want to make it easier for kids to get to the library and get to school without having to drive and access the things they need to access day to day. So you can find little summaries of all these and others on our website. It's a really cool mix, and it's one of the things I really enjoy about this grant program. And the other reason we do it, besides I enjoy it as part of my work, is that it's a way to amplify the stories of communities, because so many of the things that are being done locally provide examples for regional ideas, provide examples for state ideas. And we are little local laboratories, and we like to be able to celebrate that and congratulate people, particularly given that so much of this work is done on a volunteer basis by all of you as community members. So I'll stop there, and thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Next, I'm going to ask Liz Gleason from Vermont Housing Conservation Board.
Thanks, Jen. This is really nice to hear about all of these programs. I've worked with almost everyone on this call for potentially years, and I feel like I've already learned some new things. So the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board funds a pretty wide variety of projects. Mostly our work is focused a little bit more behind the scenes rather than working directly with communities. We're working with the local land trust, affordable housing development folks, working with those kinds of local and regional partners to fund the on-the-ground projects that they bring our way in the realms of land conservation, both natural areas and agriculture, and affordable housing of all different kinds. And then we also do a fair amount of more direct in the community type funding work. So we have grant programs for farmers as part of our Vermont Farm and Forest Viability Program. And we also have a small program that's called the Rural Economic Development Initiative, which basically recognizes that there's a huge amount of information and complexity out there in terms of what funding is available for projects, and small communities need help with that. So we can basically hire grant writers and fundraising consultants on behalf of small communities to help them actually get all this amazing money that we're here talking about today. So I'm not sure how useful it is to go through projects in all of those buckets, but I'll just say that that you know, there's a pretty wide variety of ways that the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board might be already involved in your community. But if you particularly work in the sort of working land sector or find yourself someone who is trying to get grants, I'm sure all of you are, that's why you're on this call, and need help with that, those are two of the ways where we might interface a little bit more directly. And I think that's all I'll say. I know that was kind of shorter than my time, but there's so much information to get through.
No, that's great. And we'll do another round of sort of like, you know, big messages you want to get across to people. So it's perfect. Thank you.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much, Liz. So next up is going to be the Windham Foundation, Becky Bryant.
Hi. Our grants program covers the state of Vermont, and we do fairly small grants 4 times a year. The spectrum is pretty broad on what we cover, things from environmental enhancements to education in the broadest sense, and historic preservation for items that are going to help the communities. A lot of community based grants are given. So we like to focus on more small organizations in local towns versus the larger organizations. We do some of the last grants that we did one for the Jericho Historical Society, and they had a bank that was eroding and it was becoming dangerous for the museum as well as visitors. So we contributed to the stabilization of that bank. With the current situation with COVID, we gave a grant to Hunger Free Vermont to help out with that. Again, helping the communities. A couple other ones that we did. We did the Meals on Wheels program in Springfield. We helped out with that, supporting the Meals on Wheels program, another food source this time. The Children's Literacy Foundation, supporting, you know, educational purposes there, getting books out for kids, for reading, really supporting those efforts there. I don't know what else to say. So we just have a broad spectrum that we contribute to the community.
That's terrific, Becky. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we'll come back around again with some more kind of pointed questions about, you know, how to communicate with you guys. And next up is going to be Kevin Wyberg from the Vermont Community Foundation. And specifically too, I know last time we did something like this, you had a lot of great information and advice about how people should engage. So like hold off on that in this round, but I can't wait to get to that. And just, you know, give us an overview of what you do and the kinds of projects you guys fund, which I know is vast.
Absolutely, thank you. And it's so great to see so many familiar faces and the new Mr. Preservation Trust, Ben Doyle. It's great to see you comfortably in your new role. So the Vermont Community Foundation has been around over 25 years, and we make both competitive and non-competitive grants to nonprofits and municipalities, schools, and other institutions to the benefit of Vermont. We're a public charity, which means that, and a place-based charity, which means that our funding is raised and specifically deployed to the betterment of Vermont and Vermonters. We have about 20 different grant programs that require an application. Some have specific deadlines, some are have rolling deadlines. In a typical year, my team, I'm on the Grants and Community Investments team as a philanthropic advisor. We put out about $800,000 in discretionary funding through these grants programs. However, $25 million comes out through the Community Foundation annually. So there's a lot of direct donor to charity grant making that happens here. We also do mission investing in larger projects such as housing, community, economic development. We're part of the Putnam block, as Ben mentioned earlier, and also the Wilson block, which is a similar project in Springfield. I was hired in 2017, along with a couple new staff, to really support our strategy on closing the opportunity gap for Vermonters. And we've since then, we've focused on early care and learning, support for youth and families, college and career training, and community and economic vitality. And then mid-March shows up, and we have done a hard pivot to focusing on COVID-19 recovery, response and recovery. And I am just really pleased to share with you that our philanthropic team raised over $7 million since March for specific COVID response and recovery relief. And that continues to humble me every day. We made a commitment to our fund holders that we would get that money out by the end of December. So we are hustling, as you can imagine. We have done a number of grants to networks around the state as part of COVID response, networks such as the mental health networks, domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, food shelves and pantries, really trying to figure out what was the fastest way to deploy resources at a critical point in time. So we've almost deployed about half of that money at this point, and now as we look to recovery, we're looking at different initiatives, and we're looking at rural connectivity, food system resilience, learning in transition, rural entrepreneurship, and welcoming anti-racist communities. So those initiatives may be multi-year initiatives, but we are putting significant funding into each of these initiatives. I'm focused on rural connectivity, and offline I'll tell you everything you need to know about rural connectivity in the state of Vermont. We do a ton of different types of funding in a typical year. We have very small grant programs to very large grant programs. Some of the things that we've funded recently, in addition to a lot of this COVID work, is we're replacing a sprinkler system backflow check valve at a family center. That's as exciting as philanthropy can get. However, without this $1,000 piece of equipment, this family center can't be open to do its work. We're funding a rural library to install air purification systems. That's in direct response to COVID. We've done a grant for strategic planning to a homeless shelter. And we've been making general operating support grants to communications union districts around the state of Vermont as part of our rural connectivity initiative in our COVID recovery phase. I think I'll leave it at that so we have more time to chat. But I do want to let you know that, as other people have said, as a public charity, we're not as restricted by things such as a federal grants program. So we welcome conversations, we welcome communications prior to grant deadlines, et cetera. So, and that's where I'll leave it, Jen.
That's great, and that's a perfect segue to our federal grant program. I'm gonna ask Max Muise to talk next, please.
Thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate that. Yes, Jen, you're absolutely right. Federal programs can be a little more daunting, but very navigable with some help from the staff that are employed by there. So yeah, I'm John Muise, also known as Max. I am the area director for USDA Rural Development, which is a federal agency under the Department of Ag that primarily focuses only on rural America for community and economic development funding. Our mission is to increase economic opportunity, improve the quality of life in rural America. And we do that through financing mechanisms. So we have guaranteed products where a bank will come to us and say, you know, we might want some insurance on that. An example in town here you might have visited is the Brattleboro Food Co-op. The lender financed that, but it's a specialized piece of collateral. And they said, we'd like a little more insurance on that. And we were happy to step up and and help that lender make that loan. We have direct financing that, can assist primarily not-for-profit and municipal type entities with our community facilities program that offers essential community services. Taking another walk up Main Street, you might have been in the Latches Theater. We helped them get their new seats in there if you had a comfortable seat at that there. New England Youth Theater, we had some funds in there a few years ago as well for some of their equipment. Strolling of the Heifers Building, the library, municipal services, the fire truck in town, things of that nature. And then we have the all-inclusive grant programs, which also can match up the same eligible criteria for our primary loans, but in a smaller matching grant component. So, we also get into things like helping people buy their first home. So if you have employees, or if you have, know someone that's trying to buy their first home, we might have a product that might be able to help them get into that. As well as we will all see our aging neighbors that want to stay in their homes. We have programs that might help them with a ramp to get in their house, or a roof, or a furnace, or something like that. We deliver about 40 different programs.
Oh, we just lost you.
You just muted.
Are you there? Okay, sorry, not sure what happened there. We'll try that again.
You were at 40 different programs.
Yes, sorry. So the most important thing I just put in the chat is my contact information, because there's no way I can possibly give great credit to all the different things that we offer around the region. Again, so we have things that can help out for-profits, not-for-profits, and individuals. For a not-for-profit municipal lending, we do have grants. However, we primarily have loans for those. And you're not going to find probably any better interest rate for financing. We're at 2 1/8 right now for our not-for-profit lending. Can go long as 30 years on real estate.
Oh, Max is frozen, and we had a flicker too.
Yeah, my power just flickered too.
Wow.
It's like his lights are off in his screen.
All right, well, I'm going to assume we might have lost Max there for a moment. So most other folks seem okay. What I wanted to say, and I wanted him to hear, was, some of the stuff that we do here at BDCC is also backed by this program that runs this webinar. We also give lending to small businesses. That's USDA backed micro entrepreneur loans. So they are all over the place, and not just agriculture. The last 3 people that I would like to have introduce themselves and their programs and some examples, I'm going to sort of bundle you together, because in some ways I'm not clear where each of your work stops and the next person begins, and so maybe it makes sense for you guys to sort of manage that together. So it's Nathan Cleveland from the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development. It's Brett Long from the Vermont Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And that I think Christy Farnham, you're on here to talk about brownfields. So maybe if we can just unmute all 3 of you, you can also kind of give people a sense of how you all relate in your departments and work.
I think Christy is on instead of Brett today.
Oh, instead of Brett. Okay. All right. So Christy, let's cover all of it. So
Yeah, right.
Christy, you got that? You're going to cover mine too?
For sure, Nate. Just to,
right.
Kick back and grab a coffee or something. So I'm Christy Farnham. I'm with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development within the Department of Economic Development, and I am the Director of Business Support with that team. We do broad-based BRE work, and if I was to tell you of all of the programs, incentives that our department runs, we would be here until November of 21 probably. Today, I wanted to sort of narrow down to the Brownfield initiative that I manage for the agency, which is a cleanup grant that was capitalized by EPA. So this is federal funding, and it does come with some of those federal funding strings we talked about with some of the other partners on the call today. It's a program that dates back to 2009, and the one that I manage right now, the grant that I manage from EPA, has been active since 2014 and has brought over $3 million in cleanup funding to Vermont thus far. That is augmented when I'm victorious in my own grant writing to the federal government, which I do annually, and have been victorious in my last 3 attempts. Most recently, bringing an additional $375,000 to the fund last year. We have about $600,000 in funding that hasn't yet been deployed, as well as over $200,000 in program income that we have amassed from the repayments of our loans. So the RLF deploys funding in the form of grants and loans specific to the implementation of corrective action plans. And so that is strictly for the remediation of brownfield sites. It's a statewide initiative, and the grant funding is only available to nonprofits and municipalities, and that includes our RDC partners. Loan funding is available to for-profits and any municipalities that are interested in applying for loans. And those are underwritten by our partners at the Vermont Economic Development Authority. The terms and the rates are determined by ACCD, and we like to see those roll out to support these brownfield projects. So we offer incredibly flexible rates and terms, usually in the 2% range with payback periods of decades. So we're very generous with that funding. The tricky part for us is that we have to loan more of our grant than we grant out or sub-grant. And so there are often times that we have to offer a blend of grant and loan funds even to nonprofits or municipalities. Our application is on a rolling basis, and there are a few requirements. I won't get down to the nitty-gritty of those details in this conversation. It is available on our website, but probably more nuanced, and prospects should just be in touch with me to talk through those. I was really excited to hear some familiar projects that we have funded with our brownfield money. The Putnam Block is one of them, Congress in Maine and St. Albans. CAD prototypes, the former LW Greenwood building in Randolph, and the town of Hardwick with the Yellow Barn. And I guess my plug before I turn it over to Nathan is I love these public-private partnerships where there is regional, state, and federal infusion. And I manage 3 programs for the agency, and I really like that focus on project prioritization, and we lean on our regional development corporations to help us identify what is most critical to the regions that they oversee. And so that would be my wish list, that we could do even more collaboration. I think we're heading in a great direction, and the work with economic development and community development has never been more coordinated, and we've never seen a greater return on investment. So we're really lucky to have these partners on the phone. Thanks. Nathan?
Thanks, Christy. So my name is Nathan Cleveland. I am the lead community development specialist with the Vermont Community Development Program within the Department of Housing and Community Development, which is within the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. We administer the state's annual allocation of CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Funds. These funds are through HUD and are targeted to directly benefit low to moderate income individuals. 70% of our annual funding needs to directly benefit individuals earning less than 80% AMI. And we obtain this benefit through many various different types of projects, from planning grants that are available for up to $60,000 to accessibility modification grants that are available to municipalities for ADA work that will bring their buildings, municipal owned buildings, into compliance with the ADA regulations, to implementation for public facility, public services, economic development, public housing, etc. The coolest thing about our funding is it can touch a broad range of different projects, and almost every project that has been mentioned in today's presentation by other funders included our funding as well. The other funding source that we provide right now is Community Development Block Grant COVID funding, CV. We have a direct allocation for business assistance, as well as a program that will be rolled out after the CRF money is completed for rental assistance for landlords and tenants, as well as a public facility and public service component that right now nonprofits and municipalities are eligible for up to $50,000 with zero match to address, prepare, respond, and prevent COVID-19, the spread of that. So we're seeing various projects like the Marlborough Alliance down in Marlborough is looking at their community center, adding new HVAC system upgrades to allow remote learning in their community. We are looking at things as diverse as outdoor skating rinks in communities to promote outdoor recreation throughout the winter time. Our regular program funds various things from, we're working on a Gardner Memorial Park up in Newport, doing a huge renovation to that because they're a low moderate income community, to a recent award that hasn't been fully announced yet, but for the Bridgewater Community Center, which is converting their elementary school into a community center that will have childcare, public meeting spaces, and senior services. So we can touch many different projects. The cool thing about our funding is that depending on how you look at the project, you can find eligibility for it. So the most important thing to know about our projects are every one of them requires an environmental review. It's through the NEPA Act. That's number one. So you need to get through that process before you can go through and commit money to anything. So that's probably my number one thing that I wish everybody knew about our funding, that don't move forward until you've talked to myself or my partners, because if you want to access our funding, you've got to follow and jump through the HUD hoops. And it can be arduous, but worthwhile if it's done thoughtfully. And I just wanted to just kind of give you a visual. So I'm going to try to share my slide right now. And hopefully I do this successfully, but I can't do that. So never mind.
There's going to give you power.
Go ahead.
Can you grant me power? Awesome.
Power is yours.
Yay. Let me see if I can get the right one up. It's showing all sorts of fun things. But there's the one I wanted.
Choose wisely, yes.
Too many screens open right now. So can you guys see the screen slide that I have prepared here?
Yep.
Okay. Great. So this is giving you a sense of the funding that we have available. We receive about $7.2 million in our annual allocation on an annual basis. We just received $6 million requests, and we have 3 board meetings. So about $2 million gets awarded per each one of those board meetings. So $6 million request for 7.2. Our next few slides, if you continue going to your right, are the CV funding that we have. And I think the second column is what I'd like to draw your attention to, because this is probably what most of you would be interested in right now. We're hoping to be able to increase the maximum amount for this program up to $200,000. And again, there is no match requirement for this. And it just needs to respond, prepare, and prevent COVID-19. And again, an emphasis on benefiting low to moderate income individuals. So if you have questions about any of this, I'll put my contact information into the chat, so you can reach out directly to me, and then I can get you in touch with the right person who covers your region. Actually, that's going to be me. So I forget that we're in Southern Vermont. So if you're over in Bennington County, you're going to be talking to Patrick Sheld, and if you're in Windham, Windsor County, you'll be talking to myself. So thank you for having me here today. It's a ton of information and it's hard to digest it all. So if you have a project you think might be able to be eligible for our funding, please reach out to me.
Great, Nathan, thank you. That's great. And I think, you know, if one of the things we get across to folks is don't assume that you already know what funders fund or won't fund, then that is a great takeaway from this. And, you know, and I know it's not meant for you to memorize everything everyone's telling you, but to really understand that, like, getting funded is a journey. I think it might have been Rich Grogan, might have said something about the long horizon. Somebody used that phrase, and it's really important to think of it that way. A lot of times folks spend so much time trying to perfect their project, and then they're like, we're ready to fund it. It's like, you have a whole other long horizon that you needed to start back when you were visioning and figuring out your funding landscape. So Also, and Nathan started to segue us into what's going to be like kind of the rest of this, which will be, I think I'm just going to call on people to sort of basically get you guys to talk about what you wish people knew, what you wish people were asking you to fund, the kinds of projects you're looking for, and what do you wish people knew. I'm going to take 1 second to just say, I think the way for us to do this is for you to kind of raise hands and have Sarah help me pick people out of the participant thing. So I think we'll do it that way because I cannot see you all on one screen, unfortunately, which is awesome. There's so many. And I also have to remember, as I look at the participant group, I don't know everyone who's on this, and that in Southern Vermont, you know, the way we run this program, we really invite a lot of lay people, volunteers, folks that are on boards, not necessarily, you know, even professional fundraisers or town officials. And so I'm just going to unpack a few acronyms, but please type into the chat if you have any other questions. The phrase AMI was used, it's area median income, and it's just what it basically means. Some programs are means tested to the income of the household and the applicant. ADA, you probably all know, it's Americans with Disabilities Act, and so there. And then BRE, which is business retention and expansion, and that's a term commonly used among economic development folks. If I've forgotten anything else, remind me. I just want to make sure that this is really accessible to sort of all of our participants all the time. And with that, I'm just gonna sort of throw it out there and ask folks to jump in, funders, with your advice on what you wish people knew when they were applying and kind of how you would like them to engage with you, maybe versus how people do, and what you would like to be funding right now.
I'll start. This is Nathan Cleveland. It's kind of interesting. I had a meeting this morning with my team, and one of them, you know, we can do a lot of things. So broadband and potentially migrant housing farmer working is two different programs that we could fund, but we have not. So it'd be interesting to see how we could move that forward and improve things with both broadband in rural communities and housing for migrant workers or farm workers. One thing, one of my colleagues doesn't like my example of Newport, but we can do some really cool things in communities that are very impactful, that are community development, like the Gardner Memorial Park. We can do recreational facilities, which helps everybody, in my opinion. So that's another thing that I think we are underserved on.
Great. That's awesome. Who else wants to pipe in? Because I will just call on people. All right, someone, wait. Ben, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, well, I would just quickly say as a funder, I think the most important thing for community folks to know is that funders are and should be your friends, right? Like that, you know, I think sometimes people have this anxiety about talking to multiple funders and that they want to have one conversation over here and another conversation over here. And I think the best thing you can do is try to pull funders together to have a common conversation. You know, in the same way that if you're going to build a house, you're going to talk to the people who do the foundation and the roof and frame up the walls all at the same time so that there's a logical sequence of doing that. It's the same with a project. And, you know, I know as a funder, we don't often look at something and say, oh, somebody else has that, we don't want to be a part of it. We'll say, oh, wow, they're funding that. Here's a great opportunity to leverage our funding. Let's talk together about how to do that. So I would just encourage you folks not to have conversations in isolation, but to try and have common conversations to bring funding forward.
I see Kevin is unmuted, and Liz, and then Christy.
Liz, were you going to respond to specifically something Ben said? Because you can go, why don't you go first?
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I guess I really just want to underscore that point. I know how long it can take to have a similar conversation with 2 or 10 or 20 different funders. So I would really recommend, you know, when you reach out to someone, whether it's private philanthropy or a big federal agency, to say, like, who else do you usually work with? Like, who else would you recommend I talk to? Can we have a conversation at the same time? And kind of bring those things together. And I guess I'd also just want to underscore the point that a couple people have made about communication in general. As someone who both writes a lot of grants to fundraise for our programming and also helps other people write a lot of grants, I think that often you might come to a particular funder and present your idea as if like you have everything figured out because you want funders to think that. But I think it's also okay to come with more vulnerability and curiosity and kind of work together on a project, because as funders, we try to get everything, all of our criteria down clearly, but like it's just so much information. And the earlier you come to someone, the back and forth you can have, like that's really valuable. And I think it's with every funder that I know personally, it's a benefit to your project rather than a detriment.
Great. Kevin.
So I think all of us will probably have the same advice at some level, but I do want to emphasize the importance of partnerships and collaboration, and relationships really matter, particularly in a state the size of Vermont. I know 4 people at least on this phone call, for example, and we do talk to each other. So I think that's always important to remember. Make sure that when you're writing a proposal to anybody, use clear and compelling language, and write to the promise of your work. We know that there's a lot of issues and problems out there, but if your application isn't going to describe how you're going to help solve something or make it better, it's not going to be very compelling for funders. And to give you an idea, I just 2 weeks ago finished reviewing 120 applications. So the ones that use interesting, compelling language are such a sweet relief sometimes when we're going through that many applications. It's competitive out there, and not every good proposal is going to get funded, which is really unfortunate. But if you don't at least try, I can predict your success rate, which will be 0. So I encourage people to just, sometimes you're going to have to apply 2, maybe even 3 times to a particular funder to have success. But that's where relationships matter. And the time to develop a relationship with a funder is not 2 days before the deadline. I would say it's probably at the time of conceptualizing your ideas. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks,
Okay,
Kevin.
I'd love to jump in, or if that's okay.
Yes, Susan, go ahead, and then we'll do Christy and then Kate.
Okay, great. So I would like to underscore what Ben, Liz, and Kevin said. I think I'll probably end up repeating what they said if I really have to. I won't repeat what they said, but I'll add to that an emphasis on collaborating with other organizations. Yes, obviously, we'd love to see other funders on board with a project. That just gives it that much more credibility and lift, and wow, it means another set of eyes on it, and we get really excited to see that. But with Brattleboro, as an example, there are so many organizations, and we really don't like to see organizations operating in a silo. We want to know that they are connecting with a number of organizations that are in a related, similar space. So that's really, really important. If we don't see that, it's a big strike against the proposal. We just really need to see that this is interconnected with other organizations and people in the community.
Thanks. Christy? Did we look for her? Kate, why don't you go ahead?
All right. Thanks. Really, really great conversation. I like how it's building from person to person. As far as building the relationship and maybe failing a couple times before you have success, so true. We've had a couple of applicants where the first project didn't quite hit the mark, but that opened up a conversation for what a project could look like that would fit in better. And I can think of at least one where it's gone from rejection to a project that I'm actually really very excited about and that I'm learning from. That's always a nice bonus as a funder when you get to learn new things based on what your recipients are doing. My other comment builds on Kevin's remark about clarity. in the grant application, and I'm almost sorry to even make this suggestion because it may seem obvious, but I'm going to make it anyway, which is that I find it really helpful when our applicants speak very directly to the evaluation criteria. And for our smart growth grants in particular, I want to hear a little bit of a story about how the project is going to advance smart growth. I want the writing to demonstrate that the applicant really gets what smart growth is and isn't. So that's very important. And we also have a criterion, an evaluation criterion, which is, I'm just going to read it. We want people to speak to how their project is inclusive in the engagement of the public with focused efforts that enable access to a cross-section of community members, especially those who historically have not had access to public processes. That's a big one. That's hard to write a few sentences about. And I know from my own work and others' work that we're always doing our best, bending over backwards to get people to show up at meetings. And this criterion asks for even more, which is to get people to show up at meetings or participate in some way, people who usually don't feel included in these processes. But as a funder, we sort of think, again, that opens up a conversation about how we do these things and how we can do them better into the future. So there's capacity building. So for anything like that that might seem hard or like something you haven't done before, like pick up the phone. We can figure it out. We can learn together.
Awesome.
I'd like to just kind of piggyback on that because a lot of these funding sources require a public process behind it as well. So especially with our program, the municipalities, the Vermont Community Development Program and the Community Development Block Grant funds that we have, the municipality is the applicant and the funds could get sub-granted or loaned depending on how the project works out. Sorry, shifted gears here. I'm on lunch duty with the kids, so down in the kitchen. But I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle is that Vermont has a lot of funding priorities, including smart growth priorities, designated downtowns and village centers are growth centers that we want to try to promote reuse and revitalization. And so if you have a project that is in one of those areas or has the potential to be able to seek after a different designation program that could help your project get a leg up on the other applicants in the area. Reaching out to the municipality to seek their partnership is a huge benefit for any project that's moving forward.
Thank you. Sarah, are there other folks in the queue? I've lost track.
Becky.
Thank you.
I just want to say too, I mean, all the stuff that's been said is great. And that's one of the things I hear with our committee is they want to see the community involvement. And I think it's really important that the applicants also know the foundation that they're applying for and have a little history in what they're looking for. Because I know a lot of times too, we have great projects that come in front of us, but it's in the pilot stages. And that's hard for us to, with the amount of funds that we have available through the year, it's really hard for us to want to support a pilot fund versus something that's already in the stages. So I think it's important for them to, applicants to even contact the organization or the funder and see what stage they're looking for of the project and just get a little knowledge of that because the timing is very important, I think, as far as, you know, on our end where we're concerned.
That's a terrific point because I think that, and that varies by funder and by project, but I think having that long conversation helps bring funders into a project at the right point. And I want to leave, you know, some time at the end for more spitballing and any questions that we have from folks, but I did want to sort of, that made me think of something that I want Rich Grogan to speak to, which is, you know, sort of that panel that we developed for the summit a couple of years ago and the conversations leading up to that, sort of about that, you know, ecosystem and sort of why we all have to know each other because we're referring to each other or joining on things. And I would love for you to describe that more articulately than I just did, more thoroughly.
Absolutely. So I think you're saying just the importance of like funders playing well together. Is that kind of where you're pointing me?
Well, and also for folks seeking funding to understand you sort of that there's like this ecosystem, and you know the project they're doing today in 5 years will need a different kind of funder or support, whether it's a business
Right.
or whatever. So it's really like the longitudinal view is the.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. And we've had a couple of references just in the last few minutes to, you know, funding, so what I would term pilot projects versus funding something that's a little further down the road, things like that. I think that's a great point. I think projects, like the biggest projects, you know, which for our, you know, for Northern New England might be a $20 million project or something like that. I think that they're most successful when they have had the kinds of conversations that we're highlighting today and think about, you know, they've got this sort of longitudinal view, they've got a long time horizon in front of them, they know where they want to go, and there's a vision attached to that. And they're able to identify funding sources along the way that can fill those particular gaps. And so I think like some of the most successful projects that come to us early are the ones who can say, we've identified that USDA funds, for example, might be a good fit for this project down the road, but there's a gap here of, you know, a few $100,000 or whatever. And, you know, we're thinking that you all might fit into it because of X, Y, and Z. So they're almost leading us, as you just led me, Jen. They're kind of leading us to, you know, to where their project wants to go, and they have a clear vision of how our funding fits in, and I feel great about that. And that, I think, gets to something maybe that Ben said earlier with regard to, I think the term used was that funders are your friends. I think that takes an openness and an honesty with a particular funder to being able to say, like, you know, this is where you fit into my pipeline, and then we can determine whether that, you know, whether that will work. But I think, like we, you know, just as a quick example, we've been doing a lot of work with the outdoor recreation economy for the last few years, and there's this great program being run by EPA right now called Recreation for Rural Economies, where they're doing these really deep dive technical assistance work with communities, 10 communities around the country. 4 of those communities are in Northern New England. And, you know, they have had federal funders and non-federal funders get on the beginnings of these sort of community charrettes to talk about whether the outcome of these technical assistance projects might result in funding down the road from one of these funders. And so I've been fortunate to attend a couple of those sessions, and there's a couple of those projects that I hope they have laid this really critical groundwork through this technical assistance opportunity through EPA that I think will make great NBRC projects down the road. And so, you know, sort of helping those communities to see that that might be an outcome for them has been, I think, really beneficial. So.
That is great. And I am going to open it up to questions or things we've left off the table, because I'm going to end this on time. I realize an hour and a half is a lot of time to be on the Zooms. And so we're going to leave about 8 or 10 minutes here for anything.
Mm-hmm. So if any of the attendees have any questions they want to throw out there to the funders, specific or general is fine.
Are they able to unmute themselves right now at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It's like we answered all their questions.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Gary?
Yeah, so with unsuccessful grant applications, you talked a little bit about non-federal being open to having conversations before the application, but how do folks feel about conversations after the application to find out where the weaknesses were or what didn't fit about the project, or what could be developed differently down the road, or you know, or if it's, you know, as simple as writing and clarity, and figuring out that sort of thing.
I would love to jump on that if I can. Sorry, Kevin, I see you're raising your hand. I don't mean to cut you off. I'll just quickly say that not enough people, in my opinion, take advantage of that with the MBRC. We make ourselves very available at the state level. So I'm volunteering Christy here for these conversations in Vermont, but at both the state level and the commission level, we're always willing to have people have conversations with applicants after the fact if they're not successful, to let them know where there are some areas they could improve for next time. And I think that is, you know, one of your questions, Jen and Sarah, was about what things I wish people knew. That's a thing I wish people did, was reach out to us after the fact. And we may be able to point them to another funder that just makes more sense for them, you know, for this particular project they want to do. So anyway, sorry again, Kevin, I'll pass the mic to you.
No, that's okay, Rich. I was going to say that we actively encourage people to reach out to get feedback, Gary, because how can you improve if you don't have that opportunity for that conversation? I look at a grant proposal as the beginning of well, hopefully the middle of a conversation, not the ending of a conversation. So it's great for people to contact us when they're not quite sure if it's the right fit. And it's great when people contact us when they don't get funded, so that we can help them improve their work. And I will say that within the VCF, we do share stuff between departments. My department is focused on grants, but we also have an entire department that's focused on working specifically with fund holders. And if something isn't really a good fit for one of our competitive grants programs, but we think it has merit, we will share that with that philanthropic advisor for that region, in case they have an individual fund holder who might want to support the great work that you do.
Great question, Gary. Anyone else from the attendees that have a question?
You know, one of the things that I find, we end up giving a lot of informal referrals and advice around funding to folks. And, you know, one of the things I love about Vermonters is Vermonters, you know, think they have to do everything themselves for themselves. And so one of the hardest things is just to convince people to go for funding. And one of the ways I try to frame it is like, you know, you're solving their problem. They have these resources and their job is to put them on the ground, and you may have the solution to their problem. And that kind of like somehow makes people feel a little better for asking. Another thing I just wanted to say is that we're not, you know, we kind of fairly specifically didn't touch on, although I mean, I appreciate Kevin, you sharing what the foundation is doing around COVID relief, because that's different, but we didn't touch on the state or federal relief programs. That's not what this webinar is really intended for, around sort of business assistance or a lot of the other social assistance. We do have once or twice a month BDCC hosts, and really everyone's welcome to come, something that is more geared to that. We have our kind of working group on, we just had one yesterday for sort of regional folks, folks like Gretchen, you know, chambers, town officials, where we make sure everyone's up to speed on relief grants and lending and programs. And then we do that for sort of the business community once or twice a month as well. So there is sort of a different forum for that. We very deliberately didn't cover those things here. And if we don't have anything else, we'll finish. I don't know about you, but I never remember to build in breaks between my Zooms. So we'll finish a couple minutes early. You probably haven't had lunch yet. So I snuck mine in during the last Zoom. But I also want to say, you know, a special thank you. One of the quiet evolutions of priorities for us as an organization, for BDCC and SVEDS, has been continuing to increase our focus on expanding resources for our partners, resources that come into the community. So for our annual report this year, for the first time, I actually really sat down and tallied up the not even informal things, didn't count any of those, just things we did like a direct assist or helping to administer, even wrote the application for. And, you know, we had like $2.5 million last year and another, I think 2.7 already out for the coming year, of just dollars for totally other people, not even things like pass through us to other people. So like through programs. I mean, like this is like money that will leave our doors or never come to us. And that's such an important evolution for us because, you know, capacity is the greatest challenge in rural areas. And all of the towns and the nonprofits and the libraries and the partners that we work with like need to be more well-resourced and robust. So we're really focused on that, and we really appreciate your generosity in helping make them make yourselves more accessible to them and more known. And I hope it's already built some bridges over the last, year or so, and will continue to, because, hopefully this does make your job easier over time to have these relationships, but it certainly is enriching the organizations that, make this region run. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, on that note, unless anyone else wants to have the final word, which is usually always Jen, which I love. Great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Funders, thank you again for taking the time to be here. I think we had about 30 people on at one point, which is great. And again, this is recorded, and so people can access it on our website, brattleborodevelopment.com. And I will also put all the funders' contact information with that, so that people have access to that right by the recording. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. Happy Friday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye.